Hello guys, as always, thanks for tuning in. Jay Helmsing here. Welcome back to the channel, where today I'm going to review one of the most underrated pistols available on the market today, and that is going to be the FNS-9. So we'll get into the meat of this in just a moment. I will set the stage by letting you guys know I do have some shooting impressions with this pistol, so I have fired this pistol fairly extensively prior to the one gun project that I'm currently working on now, so we'll get into that as I see fit in just a moment. We're going to do this top to bottom as I typically do with these pistol reviews. Let's start with at the top here with these sights. These come with really nice metal sights from the factory. These are nice steel. They're not going to bend, deform, anything like that, and they're perfectly serviceable out of the box. Now they are kind of unique. They do have some serrations on the rear there for some anti-glare. They have the standard 2-dot contrast sights. These are not the tritium version that is available. And the front has a slightly larger contrast dot there. So the rear has almost a U-notch. It's not quite a U. It's kind of a unique little shape back there, but it's more of a deep cut U-notch almost. And the front sight is a little bit tall, so it makes picking these sights up really easy at combat distances. Some people really like the really big front dot there. It really doesn't affect me one way or the other. These dots I find just a little bit distractive. I don't really like anything on the rear, so if it were mine, I would probably black these out and just handle it that way, or buy some other sights for it. But as it comes in the box, these are some very serviceable, very nice sights as is, so really not much to complain about. I do like the tritium version a little bit better. The vial in the front kind of tones down that front dot just a little bit, and in the rear here it's completely blacked out, so they're just the vials in there, and I think that's a really nice touch. So night sight version, awesome gun. Not too shabby on just the plain old contrast sights as they are, especially compared to some of the other things you get out there. Now let's talk about the slide next. This slide is very well machined, and you're going to see that throughout this pistol. FN Herstal is known for making military grade weapons, specifically rifles. So most of your current fielded rifles, at least in the Army side that I've seen, are going to be from FNH, and they're made in the same factory that this particular pistol is made in there in South Carolina. So you know, a lot of the different things there, the finishing, the machining and whatnot, is just top notch on this pistol, and there's really not much I can complain about or really criticize as far as that's concerned. It's also a very nice design. It's very appealing. It doesn't look like some of the other pistols out there, and it just, you know, it has the kind of lightning scallops and things in the right places, and it's also got the bevels and whatnot. They're kind of all the rage nowadays for reholstering or whatever you want to use it for, or maybe some, you know, really specific sort of carry options or something like that. Talk next about the serrations. I really like these serrations. These are probably some of my most favorite serrations put on a pistol. They're nice and sharp on the edges. They're not so sharp they're going to cut you, but very nice and sharp. That's both front and rear, and they're close enough together that it's really easy to manipulate these serrations very quickly. So that's something I'm going to touch about here in just a moment when I talk about the 509 pistol that was released by FNH for the military contract. We'll talk, kind of make some comparisons there in just a moment, but just kind of keep that in mind when I talk about those serrations. These are very nicely done. They're not so tight that they you know, your finger rides over them, but they're just probably my favorite serrations that are put on any pistol. Just awesome serrations, and a lot of it has to do with the metal work you're going to see here. So again, top-notch machining done on this slide. We'll kind of move down. The rest is pretty Glock-like, not a whole lot to talk about. I will comment on the barrel now that we're up here. If you guys can kind of see it, this is a crowned barrel, so it does have a pretty nice crown in there, a nice recess, and it does protrude just a little bit. You don't really have a standoff with this pistol, which is common on a lot of your other pistols, a la Glock. So you guys see that's built, you know, mainly in the same way. And while we're up here, I will comment that both the front and the rear sight are also dovetailed, so you can, you know, remove those or drift them as needed. And that might be a little bit more of a robust mounting than you're going to see on like a Glock with that screw that holds the front sight in. That's just completely anecdotal, but that's kind of my feelings about it. So we'll kind of continue on as we move down to the lower half of the gun here. The polymer on this gun is awesome, and I know there are some videos out there of like an FN-45, FNS-45, or maybe it's an FNX-45 that's really deforming under some heat and things like that. Probably the same polymer you're going to see there, and maybe it does, you know, to some degree have a little bit of a sensitivity to heat, but just the way it feels is just awesome as far as being, you know, a polymer. Not real plasticky, and it doesn't really have that kind of brittle feeling like the you know, some of the real stiff polymers you get out there. So just a really nice kind of mixture of both polymers. I'm a really big fan. Nothing on this gun is smooth, so even like the areas that you're not going to touch at all, like the beaver tail up on the top and everything, does have a little bit of a grip to it, and it makes the gun overall just feel really, really solid. Again, this is just a really, really stiff polymer, so no matter how you're going to tweak it or twist it or anything, it just feels very, very strong, very robust, and you don't get very much movement out of it. And it also does a really good job at soaking up vibrations and you know, the kind of extraneous stuff that happens as you fire the gun. So it does a really good job of kind of quelling that recoil a little bit through the polymer itself, I feel. On the front here, you got your standard Picatinny rail and a very generous trigger guard here. This is a more rounded style, but it does have the serrations on the front there if you do use the front for that purpose, but it's very, very generous, so it's very easy to fit a gloved hand in here, or to, you know, quickly come off from a safe position into the trigger well there. So very nicely done. I really, you know, the ergonomics on this gun are almost second to none, and again, one of my most favorite guns ergonomically is right here in my hand. So we'll speak about that next. This has got a really nice kind of undercut here by the trigger guard, and it just fits my hand really, really well. The actual texture, the traction area back here on the grip is very, very nicely done. It's that kind of block or pyramid style that you see on Glocks, although it's a little bit more pointy and a little bit more deep. And what that affords is an even more aggressive grip than you see on like Glock with the Gen 4, Gen 5 models. And it just is really, really sticky without being abrasive. So to kind of explain that, some of the pistols nowadays have an abrasive feel to them, like the Smith & Wesson M&P 2.0, for instance. Very, very awesome gun to shoot. Sticks in your hand like nothing else. However, if you carry it, it's very abrasive. And, you know, obviously on your sensitive skin, maybe on your side here or in the appendix area, you're going to get some irritation from that. At least I did, unless you have some kind of way to cover it, or you wear another undergarment to kind of provide a layer there. And even then, it's probably going to start sawing through that undergarment. With this here, I think it's just nicely done, so it plants in your hand with a little bit of pressure, but if you don't apply that pressure to it, it nicely kind of glides over it, so you're not going to get all that irritation and so on that you do carrying other styles of grips and other styles of traction. So I really, really like the traction, really like the ergonomics. It's nice and low, it fits right in your hand, and while we're on the topic, this beaver tail here, again, probably one of my favorites on the market. It's not one of the real pointy ones like you kind of get on some of those CZs, so it doesn't really dig back into the webbing of your hand. And it's also not really wide like you get on some of them as well. And really, oddly, the one that sticks out is the P10C from CZ. It's got that kind of wide area back here that really just kind of puts pressure on the knuckles of my thumb and my you know, knuckle here on my finger. You get really none of that with this. It's just kind of perfectly made, at least for me. You know, maybe this is just, you know, speaking from my own anatomy, but it's very nicely made, and it's got a very nice, you know, form and function as far as that's concerned, as far as fitting in your hand and fitting naturally in your hand. I've always felt that Glocks, for most people, don't really fit their hand. It's kind of something you have to train yourself into for the most part. With this gun, it's just very, very natural, and they obviously spent a lot of time studying how this would fit in your hand and how to make it very appealing in that aspect. While we're up here, I'm not going to obviously point it out because it's not on here, but you might be able to see some of the discoloration in the polymer here. You can also get a safety with this gun. I obviously don't like safeties on striker fired guns, but if you are one of the ones that feels more comfortable with a safety, or if you train, you know, maybe you shoot the 1911 a lot and you train with a safety, you can also get that option here, which is not always afforded on various other pistols. So something else to consider. Back straps back here, you have two options. You have a straight version and the humped curved version here. That's the one that I like, so that's the one that goes in there. Awesome, you know, to have that availability and that adjustability in this firearm as well. Kind of, you know, standard fare for what we have out there in the market nowadays. Moving on to one of the oddities down here, this is a full ambi pistol, and by that I mean you have both ambi slide release. So up here on both sides you have the ambi slide release. You also have an ambi mag release on both sides. And the ambi mag release is not one you have to flip or anything. It's like that full time. And I think it's kind of a neat feature because when I shoot, obviously weak hand or left-handed for me, I do a lot of shooting that way, and I always get kind of mind-boggled when I have to drop the mag and reload. You know, I'm always, you know, wanting to switch over and drop with this hand instead of, you know, consciously thinking about using my index finger or my middle finger to drop it on that left side like a lot of left-handed shooters do. I'm just not programmed that way. I always think, okay, use my thumb to activate that mag release and reload. And that's kind of one of the things you're able to do with this gun if you, you know, shoot it left-handed, or if you're a lefty, you can easily just activate the you know, the mag release as it's kind of made to do. So nice feature, even if you're a right-handed shooter, for those kind of, you know, weak hand drills and whatnot. So I really like that. It's also very ergonomic, very nicely done, very grippy, and it protrudes just the right amount, as you guys can see there. It's almost a semi-extended version. It's just really, really easy to actuate. And again, I'm going to talk about that in reference to the 509 here in just a moment, but I think this is probably more nicely done than the mag release on that 509 gun that they came out with. Moving on, we'll talk about the magazines next. This holds 17 rounds, so you know, pretty generous. It's actually pretty standard fare nowadays, although you do have some out there, some of these service-sized pistols that do not hold quite 17 rounds, but you get 17 in this, at least with the 9mm. And with the subcompact versions, those hold 12 rounds, so that's also kind of a nice bonus. They've almost beat Glock at their own game as far as stuffing a ton of rounds in a pistol that's of the relative size and weight of the Glock line. So also very nice to see. One of the last things I'm going to comment about before we move on to some impressions is this magwell, and this is just an awesome, awesome magwell. So as you guys can see there, there's nothing in there. There's no, you know, scallops or hooks or anything crazy to get caught on, or, you know, let your magazine kind of run away and get hung up on in there. It's just a very nicely done, and it's also, you know, it's flared. So you guys see that flaring there, almost like you have a magwell on it. Probably my favorite, probably the best magwell in my opinion out there, and that is also considering the Gen 5 Glocks with their magwell. This, in my opinion, is better. There's just no scallops, there's nothing to get hung up on, there's nothing bizarre or bonkers in there. It just feeds right in, and you're good to go. So we'll talk, you know, next maybe about the magazine. You do have this lip on the front if you do need to rip the magazine out, and it does have a fairly generous base plate, so you can get a little bit of a grip on there and really, you know, go to work in pulling this out if you do have a Type 3 malfunction that necessitates something like that. So no worries in that department. We'll talk lastly about the trigger, like I always do. So verifying that this is empty once again. The trigger, you're going to have obviously your take up like you typically do, this free space like you have on most of the striker fired pistols. Then you're going to hit a wall, and that wall is very, very abrupt and very noticeable on this style pistol. After that, you're going to just a little bit more pressure kind of sweep through. I'm gauging this at probably about 5.5 to 6 pounds right now as far as the actual pull weight. It does not feel like a Glock as far as the way you manipulate this. It's maybe a little bit more like a P10C with a slightly more Glock style pull. Not quite as short of a reset. Maybe a little bit smaller reset than you're going to have on like a Glock, but it's not like a P10C in that matter. And I'm trying to explain this, which is really odd to do, but it does have a little bit of stacking in the trigger as you pull it through. Whereas Glock just kind of seems to, you go to that wall, you break through the wall, and then all of a sudden it actually releases the striker. On this one, it happens a little bit quicker, and once you get on that, I guess I would say it feels a little bit more like an Apex, or excuse me, an APX trigger from Beretta. It's just got a little bit more of a little more stacking, I guess, in it. A little more stacking, and it's kind of a unique feeling trigger. Now, out of the box, I pretty much do not like these triggers at all, and they feel really stiff, and I would estimate around 7 to 8 pounds is probably the norm for these triggers out of the box. They're just very, very stiff. The good news is once you put about 250 or 300 rounds down, they clear right out. So that's also very nice to see, and something very nice to experience. This one's nicely broken in. As you can see, not a whole lot of movement in the barrel or anything as I manipulate this, so it's at a nice functional level right now. So the trigger, I would probably say middle of the road, but it does improve over time, over shooting and over getting the you know, different tolerances worn into the gun. So also something nice to point out there, the trigger is no slouch, it's something very functional. Now while we're on the topic here, the trigger uses this kind of two-part trigger that you're commonly going to see on like the M&P guns from Smith & Wesson. However, this one is not nearly as aggressive as the one on the Smith & Wesson. So it's kind of stays a little bit more in that area there, and you don't have nearly as much of a kind of rebound or funky feeling as you get working on this trigger like you do on some of the M&P guns. And it works very well. It's pretty flawless in function, so you don't have the blade that's going to kind of irritate your finger. You've got that two-part design, but obviously not a whole lot of movement as you see it right there. That's the full sweep of movement, so it's pretty easy just to stay, you know, preloaded on this trigger and really not even notice its function in that aspect. But obviously you have the drop safety feature being there for that trigger, so nicely done. And that's kind of the overall thing that I'd like to say about this gun. It's just nicely done. I don't really have too many complaints at all about the gun itself. Next, I will break it down so we can kind of take a look at this. And this, I believe, was put up dirty. So we'll take a look at that here in just a moment. And indeed it was. Your striker assembly and everything being back here in this really cruddy area. Obviously, the frame rails, very long, you know, very nice in length and everything like that. So it's very strong. And it's also got a very nice lockup. You have a captive recoil spring that's also got a metal rod in it. And of course your barrel and whatnot. Barrel's a little bit more thin than what you're normally going to see, so it's kind of more of a thin barrel, maybe for weight savings or something, I'm not really sure. But it is definitely an accurate barrel, and it's got a very nice lockup, very strong lockup in that aspect. So really no complaints there with anything about how this gun functions. That said, it doesn't really seem to do anything completely above and beyond any other gun. It is extremely accurate, but also, you know, so are many striker fire guns out there nowadays. It's very reliable in my experience, but again, so are many striker fire guns out there today. So just something to think about. It does everything really well, but it just doesn't seem to do any one thing in particular over the top where I would say, yeah, sell all your striker fire guns, go out and buy this bad boy right away. So, you know, just kind of on the fence there as far as that's concerned. And I feel like that is probably why it's been, it's had the reputation it has on the market as being a really good gun that really, for some reason, no one kind of gravitates to. So, you know, just some things to think about there. Let's look at some comparisons between this and the Glock 19 next. And I will pull out one gun, which I have on me at all times. Well, pretty much at all times. So, here's where, you know, it might be a little bit deceptive. The FNS style pistol is a 4-inch barrel pistol, just like your compact size striker pistols for the most part. You got your M&P 2.0 compact, you got your Glock 19 in that size and whatnot. So as far as the slide is concerned, it is pretty much exactly Glock 19 in length. You know, take that for what it's worth. However, the actual grip is like you're going to have on the 19X, where it's a full-size grip holding 17 rounds, as I mentioned before, and your standard Glock 19 is only going to hold 15 rounds and be just a smidge shorter. So as you see there, that's kind of lined up about as well as I can probably do here. But if you'll notice, there's really not a whole lot of added space here. You know, for those extra rounds that you get. So again, kind of something FN is doing that a lot of people don't notice is they're kind of out-glocking Glock with just stuffing a ton of rounds in a fairly compact package that's just very, very efficiently designed in that aspect. So we're looking at width next. We're basically one and the same. There's really no difference in width that I can notice, except the slide is obviously scalloped and a little bit more thin in areas than you're going to have on the Glock 19, which still has that kind of stapler type appearance that Glock is known for, just kind of blocky in that aspect. And obviously the front serrations being different, so you do have front serrations on the FNS guns. Other than that, they're very, very close, very comparable. So let's stick them on the scale next, and let's see. These are both unloaded without a magazine in there. And I will zero this out so we get a nice fresh reading. So Glock 19 Gen 5 is weighing in 1 pound 5.9 ounces, 1 pound 5.9 ounces, and FNS is going to weigh in 1 pound 5.7 ounces on my scale. 1 pound 5.7 ounces, which actually surprises me because I knew they were close, but I didn't know that they were that close. So actually the FNS is slightly lighter than your Glock 19, and it holds more rounds. So something very interesting to note, and again, probably from all of the very aggressive machining and whatnot that's done to the slide to take any unnecessary weight out. Now, with that said, we'll talk next about firing impressions with the gun. First, ergonomics for me with this gun are outstanding. Really, really easy to get a very solid purchase on this gun. Really easy to drive this gun hard. The trigger is adequate, probably more than adequate as it gets broken in. So very easy to shoot, very easy to engage those targets rapidly from a reset and whatnot, and to put down rounds quickly. The recoil is very well mitigated, and it's a very flat shooting gun. If you watch some of the videos of this gun in action, it's very flat shooting, and it seems to return right to the same spot that it was fired from, probably more so than a Glock, although it does not have such an aggressive grip angle that Glock uses. So something there that I've kind of noticed. Obviously no data on that, just something that I've noticed by firing the gun. Not a snappy gun at all, very, very pleasant to shoot. Awesome gun overall. Accuracy has been more than adequate for me. I'm able to group very well with it. I think the sights are the only thing that are going to hold you back. They're more of a close, up close, quick acquisition sort of sight. So if you change your sights out, you'll probably be as good as any other pistol as far as accuracy is concerned. With the shooting impressions out of the way, I should also add that it's also been extremely reliable for me. I've had zero issues with this pistol when firing it under normal conditions, and I've put several hundred rounds down through this particular gun with no issues. Variety of ammunition, which seems to be repeatable from what I've seen out there. Now, you also get 3 mags with this, just like you do with the Glock, so that's kind of neat to come in the case. The case is probably a little bit more nicely made because it's vacuum formed and everything fits in it if you're a case sort of person and you weigh that into your purchasing options. Talk next maybe about accessories, which are really kind of a shortfall for this gun, and again, it just hasn't taken off like you would expect. And I think a lot of that's because FNH makes its bread and butter with military contracts in rifles mostly. So they're probably not marketing this as heavily as they could. You're not seeing a whole lot of police departments pick it up. You're not seeing a whole lot of push and marketing as far as trying to get this pistol to move. So I would say that weighs in very heavily with how it is received and how it is used out there in the market, and the reason it's not as popular as some of these other striker fire guns that you see. With that said, these are proprietary sights, so you're going to have to get FNS specific sights, which I think TrueGlow makes some. The standard FNS sights, I believe they're Trigicom, but don't quote me on that, but you can get those in the night version, which are a little bit more palatable for your competition shooters, and I believe Dawson Precision also makes sights for these, so you do have some options out there if you wanted to use them. It does have a little bit of clout on the competition circuit because Dave Savegny has used the long slide version of this to great effect. Of course, he could probably pick up, some kind of Saturday night special and lay waste to most of us on the range. But that said, it has performed well in competition circles as well. I don't really have anything bad to say about the gun. I really don't, and I'm really shocked. It seems to kind of one-up the Glock on almost everything. You might look at some of these reviews out there and say it's not quite as reliable if you start throwing it in mud and water and all this kind of crazy stuff. That might be so, but other than that, it is just an awesome gun, and I really don't have anything negative to say, which is going to kind of bring me to the oddity that I consider the 509. Now, the 509 was made for specific things in that military contract, and I really feel like it's being sold at this point just to kind of recapture some money that FNH has invested in that platform. Now, I haven't fired one, but I've laid them side by side, and I've done a lot of really close comparisons out of the box, just kind of handling both guns. The thing I like about the FN 509 is it does have some texturing up in this area, which is absent on most of your striker fired guns. However, it's very, very, I shouldn't say very, but it's lacking in a lot of areas, and I think the FNS is overall a better gun and a better purchase than you're going to get with the 509. I think that's specifically made for a contract, and even by FN's literature, they say that they're both going to coexist together. Makes no sense to me. So unless they're just trying to recapture money that they invested in that program by selling off the 509 pistol. So, you know, if they're both going to exist together, if that's not the Gen 2 version of this, and I really don't see a whole lot that it does any better than this pistol, I don't know why it exists. I really don't. So some things I don't like about the 509, the serrations, these nice serrations I commented on, are different on that gun. They're wider, probably for gloved hands or something like that, but they are wider, and they're not as sticky as these are. If you put some pressure on these are really sticky, and of course being wider, it takes a little bit more. You're not getting nearly the surface area. So the serrations are not as good in my opinion. It also uses different sights, so whereas these use FN specific sights, I believe they use a Sig Sauer designed dovetail for those sights. So, you know, people are like, oh, they're more readily available and things like that. Maybe, but the FN is kind of, you know, getting, FNS I should say, is kind of getting some traction as far as that's concerned with getting some parts out there. So also don't really understand why they changed the sights. The mags are not interchangeable. Makes no sense to me why they would not make the mags interchangeable between those two guns. The mag well on the 509 is cruddy. It's not nearly as flared. It's not nearly as intuitive as this is. It's more of a skinny sort of, you know, not really made for rapid reloads in my opinion. So again, a kind of another downfall there. The grips on the front and the rear of the grip here, the traction area is not nearly as aggressive on the 509 pistol. Maybe again for gloved hands, I don't know why they did that, but I don't really like it on that pistol. This one really locks in your hand. That one you can really get some movement laterally and stuff like that if you you know, use those grips, so not a big fan there. Also, the mag release has been redesigned. It has some knurling on it, but you have to, in my opinion, in my use, you have to push the mag release for the 509 in much further than you do on this gun, and obviously it's not as easy to use. So I think they made some changes that made it maybe a little more durable, a little more robust. You know, maybe they did that so the mag wouldn't fall out under military conditions. But for those of us who conceal carry or for shoot competition at the range or anything like that, it's kind of a hindrance. So again, I really don't understand why they made the changes they did, and I don't see anything that gun does better than this. I think the barrel is a little bit thicker in that 509, but again, I've had no accuracy or overheating issues or anything with this barrel in this pistol, albeit a little bit on the thin side when you compare it to other guns. With that said, that's kind of my take on the pistol. And I know a lot of people are interested in this pistol. I get a lot of questions, and I get a lot of you know, kind of interest in when I do things with these pistols. But it is just kind of an unsung hero. And I really wish that you know, the aftermarket would take off more, and maybe, you know, the market would take off more. And again, this came out in 2011, 2012. And it's essentially got the same things that the 19X does now that everyone is singing praises about. You know, as far as the overall size, the weight, you know, the flared mag well that the 19X doesn't have. It's full ambi. So there are a lot of really cool things about this gun that are kind of being overlooked by the mass market. So unsung hero, probably my favorite underdog gun right here in my hand. Also very curious to get my hands on the compact version, because I think that also can offer some really cool features in a very small Glock 26 size package. So there you have it. That's my take on it, guys. I appreciate you tuning in, checking this out. Again, like, subscribe, comment below if you have anything to ask. I will be sure to check in and fill you in when I'm able to. And as always, continue to go out there when you can, every time you can, and practice your craft. Thanks again, guys.